So welcome to the first of the last within our series of community conversations. Our mayor wanted to ensure that when tough issues arise, we as a community would be able to gather, talk about them, openly ask questions, and engage in these issues honestly. These conversations are for you all to hear all the facts so you can leave making informed decisions. With that being said, the agenda this evening is to my left, so please take a look. But with that being said, colleagues, please raise your hand from the mayor's office. We've got note cards and pens for you all. If you did not receive one, we will make sure that you do. As the presentations are happening, feel free to write your questions down. During the Q&A session, we will be sure to come by and pick them up so that they are acknowledged during that time. And with that being said, I am going to pivot to Dave Rosenberg.
Thanks, y'all, for being here. I'm just going to talk just briefly about the legislative history and LPRs and where we are today. So first and foremost, license plate readers are high-speed computer-controlled cameras that are typically put on poles in the rights-of-way or on mobile trailers or on police cars. They capture all the license plate numbers that come into view along with the location, date, and time, and in some cases, photographs of the vehicle and drivers and passengers, which is then uploaded to a central server and used from there. So in June of 2017, the Metro Council passed the first citywide policy on surveillance technology, and it included an outright ban on the use of LPRs by Metro government for law enforcement use. That stayed in effect until February of 2022, when, after a series of failed attempts to modify that law, the council voted 22-14 to approve the use of LPRs by law enforcement for certain uses, and that began with a 6-month pilot program, and it was written such that for it to continue after that 6-month pilot program, the council would have to reapprove the use of LPRs. Throughout March through August of 2022, the Metro Council voted unanimously in support of bills to ensure the COB had access to the pilot program data, to correcting some definitions, voted 32-1 to exclude immigration enforcement as an allowed use, and voted unanimously to exclude abortion enforcement as an allowed use. Then in August 2023, following the conclusion of the pilot program, Council voted 24-14 to make permanent the approval of LPRs for law enforcement use within Nashville. There are currently not LPRs in use because no contracts have been approved by the Metro Council, and that brings us where we are today, where we're determining where we are going from here. So tonight, MNPD and CRB are here to give presentations. So I'll turn it over to MNPD to go first. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Lieutenant Ricky Huddleston with the Crime Control Strategies Bureau, the Community Safety Center. We ran the pilot program out of our office. To my left is Captain Stephen Duncan. He was the program manager for the LPR pilot. So we'll jump right into it. During the pilot, it was a 6-month pilot. The program goals that we were looking for is like, does the technology work? I will say that technology has been around since 1976, was created in Great Britain to read the license plate. The first stolen car was recovered in 1981. So it's been around for several decades. So the other goals being, does the ordinance meet the community needs? Can the MNPD policy provide effective controls? And what are the best ways to deploy the LPRs? We found some success in some of the quadrants based on how they were deployed and the patterns and methods they were deployed. Can the MNPD adequately manage the program, and which vendors should be used? That's where the contract negotiations are at this stage. So you see up on the board the victim impact. These are just some examples of how the LPRs were used. The very first one up there I was personally involved in. It was a victim. She was a college student that came to Nashville as a tourist. She was abducted and taken down Murfreesboro Pike and repeatedly sexually assaulted. We used an image from a parking lot camera to locate the vehicle. It's interesting to say that the hometown that she came from had LPRs. At the time, Nashville had LPRs, and license plates readers were used in Chattanooga to locate the suspects. Those suspects are still in custody and awaiting prosecution. The results of the program. So over the 6 months at 24 locations across the city, we recovered approximately $1 million worth of stolen property. 14 guns were recovered. Now, if you take the recovered vehicles, 87. If you divide that up, that's about $12,000 a car. This isn't the $80,000 Lamborghini. Land Rover, or it's not a Tesla. This is any car that you or I would drive. Notice the ages of the persons that were arrested. The youngest one was 13. The oldest one was in their 60s. But we had 112 arrests and 130 felony charges. So some of the definitions that you will hear in the camera reads, that is the total number of times the camera took a photograph and scanned it through the database, the NCIC system, National Crime Information Center. The camera just looks at letters and numbers and compares that to what's in the database. Total hit notifications are how many times it said, hey, there is a match to this database. This needs human interaction. They would send it to us. A hit notification is what that is. When it takes a photograph, scans it, looks at the database, it's like, this is close enough, because they look at the state, the plate, the letters, the numbers, make sure they match, and they send it to the officers to say, yes or no, this is confirmed to be stolen. A verified hit is that hit notification that has been verified by 2 officers at a dual verification within the safety center that said, yes, I am seeing the entry. It is stolen. It is a qualifying category that we will look for. So come to the process through that, what that looks like. Again, camera reads, compared against the NCIC database. We received a hit notification. The 2 officers verify it, and they have to come in agreement before it leaves the safety center, before we notify the other officers on the street to go find the vehicles. Once they are in agreement, then they'll get on the radio and notify the officers to be on the lookout, BOLO, for it. This is an actual image from the LPR program. This car was stolen. It was driving down Korean Veterans, approaching First Avenue. That is the image we see because the license plates are on the back of the car, so that's where it takes the pictures of the back of the car to scan it. The camera just looks for letters and numbers. So Chief Drake has 3 core pillars, one of them being precision policing. This program is the definition of precision policing in that over 24 locations in a 6-month period, there were 71 million license plates that were read and scanned and received 112 arrests. Out of those 112 individuals arrested, 103 were linked to local criminal histories. They mean they've been arrested multiple times in almost 830 arrests. So the question comes up often in our offices, like there were 9 individuals that never had any arrest previously. That 13-year-old had not been arrested before, and now he's being found in a stolen car with a stolen gun. So what can we do to prevent that from happening again so he doesn't repeat? Hit and run crashes, another authorized use for the LPRs. So between the 4-month period between August and December, was about 3,000 hit and run crashes. 10 of those were fatal, and 8 of the 10 fatal hit and runs are still unsolved. These are some of the hit and run victims that are still unsolved to this day. You notice the very bottom one, Murfreesboro and East Thompson. The person was exiting a WeGo bus, walking along the roadway, and was struck and killed. I highlight this one because we had lots of cameras in the area. We had bus cameras, we had street cameras, we had business cameras. There was an LPR, a license plate reader camera, at this intersection, but has previously been taken down. It's my belief that had the camera been up, we would have been able to capture the license plate of the suspect that left the scene. So the hit and run locations across the city, these are the fatal pedestrian hit and run crashes and where they are still during that same time frame where they were located. And 7 of the 40 locations are interstates, which we do not have any on the interstates, and 33 were in the following generalized locations. Let me talk about the quadrants. So during the pilot program, we did divide the city up in 4 quadrants. Those quadrants were divided up by population density. We are currently in quadrant A, which takes up about 25% of the crash reports, 26% of the total dispatch calls for service, but the area is 38%, but it takes up a quarter of the population. So the other quadrants are smaller in area size because they are more densely populated. So that's how the quadrants were decided. So the placement using crime data, it took about 13,000 violent crimes that occurred in that 2-year period, and half of them occurred within 47 intersections across the city. All of them were in half a mile of each intersection that was identified as a potential site. So using the crime density maps, it'll show some few moments, looked at homicides, rapes, robberies, aggravated assault, and add that layer to the Nashville's major and collector street map. Using that data with violent crime hotspots, we identified 47 potential sites in each quadrant. It was narrowed down to 24 sites based on the availability of sunlight, based on the availability of cell signals. And that found to be an ideal location for them. So this is a map of the violent crime hotspots, what that looks like, and then the overlay of the LPR sites with the violent crime map. So the authorized uses of the LPR cameras are for gun violence, homicides, assaults, stolen vehicles, also traffic offenses. We have serious instances of reckless driving and street racers. I know in South Nashville that is all across the city it's happening, but I know they were especially interested in street racers. But also missing and endangered persons, silver alerts and amber alerts. The equipment we had during the pilot program were the 24 solar-powered and cellular-powered cameras at fixed locations, 10 mobile units, the LPRs on cars, and 7 portable trailers. So these are the crimes that occurred that were reported within that half a mile of the intersections of Dickerson and Trinity, and then Gallatin and OHB, and then Trinity and Brick Church. This is quadrant B, quadrant C, and quadrant D. First and Korean vets had the most crimes reported, violent crimes reported across the city within the half a mile of it. LPR placement and crime. So generally with the data provided, we do find that LPRs are located in census block groups with a higher share of people in poverty and people of color, but also a much higher share of major intersections in violent crime. While not determinative, this suggests LPR placement focused on violent crime hotspots and major streets. It shows each of the quadrants and the average home sale price, the high and low, for each of the intersections that were used during the pilot. So like David Rosenberg mentioned earlier, it was voted on immigration and data. The ordinance was very well written and gave us clear guidelines, and it prohibits the use of LPRs for immigration enforcement. We do not receive any of the immigration file data from NCIC. The data is deleted after 10 days, and with the management of it, only those within the safety center, only 10 persons within the safety center can view the historical data. So this was the camera map, and I've had it up since we've been sitting here, of a total coverage of the city. And what we would like to do for future plans is equitable across the city, starting at the county line going in, equal balance throughout the county. This is another proposed model of it, using various points to, using crime data, using population density, using the placement of cameras, as well as traffic density and high traffic areas to identify the locations and then support those locations. So this is a proposed pattern plan for the placement of it so that we can equitably distribute them across the city. I think I'm going to skip through this news article, maybe. And I would like to, if y'all have any questions, concerns, any feedback for it, any recommendations that you would like answered, any advice on the technology, you can reach out to us and our IT and Chief Blair at lprfeedback@nashville.gov. Thank you for your participation. Yes.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. My name is Dylan DePriest, and I'm the policy analyst with the Nashville Community Review Board. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Executive Director Jill Fitchard and Assistant Director Anthony Johnson. And today we'll be talking about Nashville's license plate reader program. So, a brief agenda of what we'll talk about today. First, we're going to start with a brief introduction on LPR technology. Then we'll go into 3 important characteristics of what we think a healthy and safe LPR program should have for Nashville. And those 3 aspects are placement, perspective, and policy. And finally, we will end with a brief conclusion. So, to begin, LPRs are automatic cameras that read license plates of vehicles that pass through them. Once it reads those license plates, it turns those license plates into a series of numbers and letters, and it runs those numbers and letters through a law enforcement database. In the case of MMPD's pilot program, that database is the NCIC, or the National Crime Information Center. This is important because it's a nationwide law enforcement database that compiles information from federal, state, local, and tribal law enforcement. And it's heavily regulated and audited as well. So while LPRs are designed for use around vehicles and have the capacity to aid in vehicle-related crimes, they also represent an increase in the surveillance apparatus of Nashville. Nashville is overwhelmingly car dependent, and you can learn a lot about someone's behavior and habits depending on where they're driving. LPRs and driving habits can be used to determine work schedules, political and religious affiliations, medical situations, personal habits, and etc. And while there wasn't any of this misuse with MMPD's pilot programs, in other states, oh, I'm sorry, I just noticed the feedback. Let's see. Is that better for everyone? Okay, I'll stay right here. While this wasn't the case with MMPD in the pilot program, it's important to note that in other cities, LPR data has been used to conduct data gathering on political rallies, religious associations, and otherwise legal gatherings, as well as for individual officers to track the movement of romantic partners, ex-spouses, neighbors, and etc. So, Additionally, certain LPR vendors in the LPR pilot program have implicated in civil privacy violations in other states for compiling and sharing and selling LPR data. There are no federal policies governing LPR use, which is why it's really important that we have policy on the local and city level, which is what we'll talk about later in this presentation. So, for some national context, the LPR pilot program ran from February 2023 to July 2023. Using data from that pilot program, NCRB, formerly the MNCO, released a report on said pilot program. In August of 2023, a full LPR program was approved by Metro Council. So, the first aspect of what we believe a safe and productive LPR program should have is talking about placement. So, these are where the 24 fixed LPRs were placed during the pilot program. You can see that they were placed in those 4 different quadrants, color-coded in the legend on the right. When we mapped those fixed LPR placements in the pilot program over base maps that represent the portion of non-white individuals that live in census blocks based on 2020 U.S. Census data, and census data based on the share of individuals in those census blocks that are living below the poverty line, we found that those fixed LPRs were disproportionately placed in both non-white and low-income areas. This here is a map of where the LPRs were placed by zip code. So, using that data, we then mapped what LPR enforcement activity looked like across these various base maps. And so, in order to display that data, we used heat maps, which are a 2-dimensional way of showing data based on concentration of where it has the highest frequency. And so those heat maps are going to be using terms we'll talk about on the next slide, and are mapped over those racial and poverty base maps that we just showed. It's important to note that we also used a base rate analysis, which was MNPD's general vehicle stops, as a way to compare how LPR enforcement activity compared to some more general MNPD practices as it relates to vehicle enforcement. So these are the LPR categories. For the sake of time, I won't go through them all. Sorry, I'm still getting more feedback. But the ones that we'll be talking about today are total hits, verified hits, vehicle stops, driver or vehicle searches, arrests, and vehicle recoveries. All right, is that better? Okay, very cool. All right, so looking at some of the data before we get into what those heat maps look like, we found that a vast majority of the LPR enforcement activity took place in Quadrant A, which covers North Nashville, East Nashville, and Madison. However, when we used MNPD general vehicle stops as that base rate analysis, we found that MNPD vehicle enforcement happens all across the city and tends to follow more general population and traffic-based patterns. When we looked at each aspect of LPR enforcement activity as well, we saw that Quadrant A was once again overrepresented. Nearly over 40% of all the total LPR hits were in this Quadrant A, and roughly between 65 and 75% of LPR enforcement activity took place in this Quadrant A. And so, when we look at what vehicle recoveries look like over those base maps, we can see that most of the vehicle recoveries recovered during this pilot program, once again, were concentrated in that Quadrant A area. But when we look at how LPR activity, which once again is on these heat maps, compares to MNPD general vehicle stops, we can see that while that activity is concentrated in that corridor of Quadrant A LPRs, general MNPD vehicle enforcement is happening all over the city, and once again following more of those general population and traffic patterns. When we go into some more of the specific enforcement categories, like with verified hits, we can see that once again, there's a concentration of activity over in that Quadrant A, with some high activity in the southeast portion of Nashville as well. However, when we look at vehicle stops and subsequent LPR enforcement activity, we can see that that concentration becomes higher and more dense in that Quadrant A corridor and less dense over in that southeast corner. That trend continues for driver or vehicle searches and arrests as well. And so we believe that placement is crucial for a full rollout of an LPR program, as instead of 24 cameras, there'll be 106 fixed LPRs, which are expected. Since then, MNPD has hosted various community sessions around Nashville in January and February, and in those meetings, MNPD shared their concern with the placement of the LPRs with the community, and the community shared their concerns, and we engaged in very generative conversations. And I think this was a very good step forward for building trust and community input into the LPR process. The prospective placement for where the full LPR program LPRs will be placed is shown on this slide, but there's a much better in-person diagram right there to look at. And while I have not have the exact addresses to run these in a heat map as well across Nashville, from a surface level analysis, it appears that these LPRs are distributed more equally than the ones during the pilot program. And they tend to follow more general patterns than just criminal statistics. And I'll talk about more about that in just a moment. Which leads us to our next aspect, perspective. So, once again, while we're going to have LPRs in Nashville, we want to make sure they are as safe as possible so that the community feels safe driving in their own home. And since LPRs are a surveillance apparatus tool, it's important that we make sure that we are protecting individuals' freedom of movement, First and Fourth Amendment rights, and privacy concerns for all of us in our community. And so to assess how individuals felt about LPRs, NCRB, once again formerly MNCO, released a survey that 117 respondents took. And using a Likert scale, we were able to gauge respondents' input into the following questions that are listed here. So from that survey, we found that typically folks had an overall positive opinion on LPRs in a vacuum in terms of the technology. However, when we asked more specific questions about how LPRs would impact, for example, police and community relationships, public trust, public safety, officer behavior, and public behavior, we saw those numbers skew negative. And from this, we learned that while most folks are actually pretty positive when it comes to the technology itself, how it's used and the process behind it tends to skew negative. And so that's really what we want to address here today. And so our big takeaway from that is folks really want clear transparency when it comes to the process. So that could be expanding MNPD's LPR dashboard to be more comprehensive, requiring external bodies to audit LPR data, which we'll talk more about in a moment, and keeping the community involved in the placement conversation. This was a quote that was in one of the open comment sections on the survey. Again, for brevity of time, I won't read it, but I will leave it up there for a moment. All right, so we also had a 10-day stretch of private data that we analyzed, and from that 10-day stretch, we saw that there are roughly 3.5 million total scans, which, as you go down the columns, lead to progressively smaller and smaller enforcement rates. And so what that shows truly is just the sheer amount of data that these LPRs are reading. And when you look at the comparison between the total scans and the recovery and apprehension rate, you can see that there's a strong divide between those who are driving through LPRs that have criminal activity and those who are just going through their day-to-day lives. And so that brings us into the final point of how we can make strong policy to make sure that we have the safest LPR program going forward for both law enforcement so that they can use them in their duties and so that the citizens of Nashville and communities of Nashville feel safe driving through them. So Once again, Nashville has a pretty strong ordinance in Metro Code 13880, which provides some good local regulation over LPRs, like limiting it to a 10-day retention period, limiting it to public right-of-ways, and adding other safeguards and protections. MNPD also has a good start when it comes to their draft policy, but we strongly encourage that they strengthen their policy around some of these issues up here, namely clearly defining that they'll exclusively use the NCIC hot list, not using custom hot lists that some LPR vendors might advertise, and once again, including information like having a no sales clause on the data, and having clear policy around private LPR integration, since many neighborhoods around Nashville have them. And finally, we really want to expand on the language in 13880 to establish an external auditing committee based on the implicated parties in that Metro ordinance, which are the District Attorney's Office, the Public Defender's Office, the CRB, as well as MNPD and a community representative. This external auditing body will be able to provide the much needed safeguards on the back end to make sure that this policy and this program is safe for all of Nashvillians. Anyway, that's my time, so thank you all so much for listening.
I'm going to go ahead and invite our community partner this evening to say a few comments. Sure. Thank you.
No, it's fine. Hi, everybody. My name is Jamel Campbell Gooch. I'm the organizing director at the Southern Movement Committee. I'm here representing the Interdenominational Ministries Fellowship. Our president, Bishop Aaron Marble, could not make it tonight, so he sent me in his place. I do want to say a couple things. First, I would like to thank the presenters for presenting such great information, but I would like to say I see a couple familiar faces. We have had these events a lot over the past couple of years. We have seen a lot of these bills go through city council. And so when I thought about what I wanted to say a couple of things. One, the way that the license plate readers are often sold to us as a fix-all, right? That they could fix drag racing, that they could fix violence, which we know as community members are often associated with poverty or the conditions that create poverty. One fact that I do want to say to folks, license plate readers are not a proactive measure to defer folks from doing things, right? We know that if we fix the issues that cause poverty, then those can actually be proactive measures. Also, secondly, there's been a tremendous reach consistently to expand policing through surveillance. We've seen this before with MNPD uploading what they call the Fuses network, which connects cameras to a central mainframe. Now, the issue, as was laid out before, is that oftentimes these cameras are placed in areas that are either considered densely populated or high traffic areas, which across the country usually mirror neighborhoods that are Black and brown based. And so oftentimes when we talk about these license plate readers, they're presented to community members as a thing that's going to fix all of our issues, when we know investment will actually fix our issues. So what I would like to leave folks with is, what if we talked about those other things as much as we have talked about license plate readers over the past 2 years? This is probably, I was formerly on the Community Oversight Board. This is probably, I want to say, the 14th meeting that I've been a part of. We're talking about license plate readers. But we have never talked about grocery stores, access to fresh food, making sure our classrooms have good investments, making sure that there's good paying jobs, making sure that there's sidewalks down streets like Osage, and also making sure that there's good transit across our city. So that's just one thing I want to challenge folks on, is that we as community members have the ability to drive this conversation, but we need to drive it towards actually talking about the things that keep our streets safe, like investment in public goods and our young people. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Jamel. All right, so we're going to move into our question and answer session. You have cue cards. If you want to pass those cue cards to my colleague Brittany. I'm going to use this mic. And there we go. And I'll read out the questions. All right. Let's see here. All right. Got a couple of questions here. Let's see. Many reports and examples from other cities caution the use of LPRs and sharing of this technology's data. What concerns does MMPD have about the consequences of this technology? What precautions is MMPD going to take to ensure LPRs do not disproportionately police and surveil Black, brown, unhoused, and unhoused people living in poverty?
To make sure I understand the question correctly, what was the first part? The issues with other agencies?
Yeah, I'll repeat it. Many reports and examples from the other cities caution the use of LPRs and sharing data of the technology. So the question is, what concerns does MMPD have about the consequences of this technology? That's the first question.
So the ordinance was strictly written, and it is well written in that they give specific guidelines for how it can be used and the use cases for it. That's why we limited the users to it to only 10 persons, and the data is deleted after 10 days. Like, it is just gone. There are, we have a disciplinary matrix for a reason, and if it is misused, we plan to use that. That's why we want the open dashboard to put the data out and the information out so it is publicly available to the citizens of Nashville. It is a significant concern from what we see across the country, but we have to be better as a Nashville resident. This LPR pilot program and the program itself, the full program, is your program. I live in Davidson County as well, and I'm also concerned about it, and that's why I'm thankful for the positions and rules that are in place to ensure that it is not misused, it is not abused. One of the methods that we are using, there's concerns about sharing of data. I know that Chief Blair and Chief Drake have mentioned about having multiple vendors so that if one were to falter, we have other options, drop that one and go with the other two. So it kind of keeps them in check, as well as the reason why we have these conversations with CRB keeps us in check. So that is the whole purpose of these conversations. I greatly appreciate y'all being participation in it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your response. And I think it's over the course of these conversations, I've been struggling with something. And I think it came to me last night or early this morning. It's the history that's embedded within how Nashville is structured, the communities and neighborhoods in which we live. Historically, they haven't changed much. There's been some gentrification and some redistricting and things of that nature. And my grave concern about LPRs is that we're not talking about the substance of the issue. Those people who know me, I love technology. This technology is wonderful. But the same concerns that are embedded with the over-policing that MMPD has engaged in certain neighborhoods in Nashville is deeply embedded in the heat maps that were shown here. That's human behavior. Or we're manipulating technology to do something that human beings have done over the course of time in Nashville. And I think the real issue is until those issues are resolved, it's almost like people are going to be fearful of this, or they're going to be fearful of the administration of this by the same people who over-police their neighborhoods, who there's a trust paradigm that has been broken. And it's almost like we need to apologize for some of the things that the strategies and practices that MMPD used that didn't work, that harmed people. And I think until we start relating to human beings, these conversations are wonderful, the structure, the opportunity, but until we really deal with people with dignity and respect again, and that says, hey, we're sorry. We did over-police that neighborhood. We did cause some harm with how we went about our jobs or our civic responsibilities. I think people are going to struggle, and they're going to miss the point. And then also the technical piece of this in terms of you still have human beings involved in this in terms of your server and things of that nature versus the industry best practice of tying this to the cloud. And there's no reason we've been given why this program, shouldn't be structured in that way.
Thank you. Those are another question. What precautions is MMPD going to take to ensure LPRs do not proportionately police, surveil Black and brown unhoused people living in poverty? No worries. What precautions is MMPD going to take to ensure LPRs do not disproportionately police and surveil Black and brown unhoused people living in poverty?
So the map you see up here is equally distributed across the county, and ideally that would be where we'd place it. But economically, like just the sheer cost of placing that number of cameras out, we talk a lot about the 6-month pilot program. It was about 5 months because the first month for 24 locations, it took about a month to get them put it up. Just the vendors placing them, the signage, the actually getting physical power to those locations. So it was about 5 months a location. I mention that because ideally this would be equally distributed across the county. And we talk about the LPR pilot, the LPR readers, as if they are viewing people, if they are viewing, watching people, watching their face, watching how they move. You saw the image on the back of the car of a license plate being scanned. That's it. The computer is looking for a vehicle traveling, and it is looking for that license plate. It is looking for the letters and numbers to compare against the NCIC database. It's a computer. It doesn't see the driver. It does not do facial recognition. It is not anything that it doesn't pull up your bank account when you're driving. The only reason why we would get notified is if that vehicle, that license plate, was in NCIC as a wanted, stolen, or missing person. That is the only way. So those are the safeguards themselves. There is no way that it can see it's not taking a photograph of the driver because all our license plates are on the back of the car. It is taking an image of the license plate.
All right. We'll move right along to our next question. Who has oversight of this program outside of MMPD? Question number 1. Number 2, what safeguards are going to be placed around the program? Before the 10 days, for example, who can access the data, ensuring it is not stored, and then past the 10 days, ensuring the data has not been saved. Start with question number 1.
Repeat the first one again.
Sure, absolutely. The first question, who has oversight of this program outside of MMPD?
The ordinance was written that gave audit abilities to Community Review Board, and outside of that, we're responsible for the information. We set in place. My mind's drawing a blank. Form. So if somebody was looking, like an investigator was looking for a plate that was involved in an investigation, if they get that to us and it's after the 10 days, it's gone. There's nothing that can be done to go back and get it or to retrieve it or to go search anywhere. Once it's gone, it's gone. The vendors, the things that are written into the contract, the vendors are going to be held to the rules and, the writings in the contract. So the violation of that, I'm sure there'll be safeguards in place when those are finalized that protect, the people of Nashville as well as, the police department, the metro government, and everybody else to ensure that this doesn't happen and nothing is misused.
All right. A second. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. When we talk about safeguards being in place, it goes back to the policy. When they created this legislation, we were really very pleased to know that they created this auditing team that included the DA, the PD, the CRB, MMPD, and a community partner. It's important, and I think that that's one of the things that Mr. DePriest talked about, is it's going to land on the strength of the policies that we create for our city to bring safeguards to people. When we think about the initial policy, I think it's a strong policy. There's areas that could be strengthened. When we talk about the private cameras and how those are used in that data, we haven't really addressed that in the policy as much as I think that we should. Because when I think about this question, it's, we know that they are considered the guardians of Nashville, but who's the guardians over private LPR data? That's important. That should be answered. The auditing team, I hope that although we talk about it and it's included, but can we, get some information on how that's going to look on a practical level? Just writing it in the policy and then moving past that is not going to be helpful. I think how we build trust in this process, because it's coming, it's here, it's already been approved, is that we are working together, all of these groups, to come up with a process on how we will do those audits, those checks and balances, and create that oversight opportunity.
And we'll move to the follow-up question. So the follow-up question has to do with safeguards. And the way this person kind of split it up, they want to know what safeguards are in place within the 10 days and then after the 10 days, as far as data storage, who can access the data, and ensuring that the data is not saved post 10 days.
So the safeguards in place, so there are only 10 persons with access to the account. There's, myself, I'm one of those 10 persons, and everything is tracked within the system. Everything is tracked. Every time a license plate is ran by an individual, it matches up with everything we run through NCIC. So all of that is audited and matched up. The safeguards for use cases, like anytime someone requests that historical data to be used or to be searched for, such as the individual in the Jeep Cherokee with a sexual assault, like they provided a form with a specific case number and complaint number. There was not any searches that was not related to an incident with a report attached to it. So that is like full disclosure. There has to be a baseline and investigation associated with it, a criminal investigation for one of the qualifying categories, such as the homicide, aggravated assault, weapons offenses, so on and so forth. But those are all documented and saved, and of the ones that we had, several of them were denied because they did not qualify under the categories, such as misdemeanor theft, fraud cases. They were not qualifying cases. It could have been a felony fraud case, but just because of the felony is not a violent offense. So those safeguards are in place. The form has to be completed, it has to be audited, and those are reviewed. A supervisor review, as well as myself, have to review it prior to it leaving or even beginning the search. As far as the data serving in the 10 days, to safeguard, that data is just deleted. everything, every mouse click on the computer for the program is tracked and logged as far as like which ones sent, downloaded which scans were run, so we can see every individual user and how they utilize the data. There's a watermark on it. And with that, once the data is gone after the 10 days, it is gone. It's not on the vendor server, it's not on our server, it's just gone. The only caveat, and they reminded me of this the other day, it was one we did not use, but within the ordinance, if it is involved in a investigation, and the only time that I recall we did use it, it was a carjacking and robbery investigation, or shooting investigation, sorry, involved in a carjacking. They asked a specific window for the tags to be saved. And that data was saved and logged and preserved as evidence. And at that point, it is saved digitally as under the rules of evidence until that case is adjudicated.
Mm-hmm. Next question. Does the state of Tennessee have access to this data? Can it be requested or subpoenaed?
They do not have access to the data. The ordinance was written that it was a closed program, which means we're not sharing with other agencies or other law enforcement. If there was a criminal need, they would have to fill out the appropriate request like anybody else did to get it. And if that is outside of it, the 10 days have already passed, it's gone. I can say we upset, kind of to backtrack a little bit, we upset a lot of cops when they would submit the requests. And, we understand what this means, and we take it very seriously. And I'm being very candid here. I've been here a long time, and Nashville is home. This is my reputation on the line, and I'm not willing to tarnish it to bend or finagle or anything else. So when we get the paperwork, we go back and do our own legwork and see, does everything fit before we give a response. And we've made quite a few within Metro and outside of Metro upset that, this doesn't meet the ordinance. We can't do anything.
All right. And before we get too far along, there was a follow-up question for Jill. You said there's a community partner as part of the auditing committee. Who is that community partner? Are you able to share those details? Mm-hmm. Sure. You mentioned that there was a community partner as part of the auditing committee. This person would like to know if you can share who that community partner is.
Yeah, that's not been defined. And so I think that that's something else that needs to be defined. I mean, I don't know if that is an organization, if those are individuals, if that's going to be on a rotating basis. I would like to be a part of that policy discussion as we begin to kind of build out that particular auditing team. And so I don't really have an answer for you at this moment, but we will check into it and talk about it. So thank you for the question.
Let's talk a little bit about misreads. This person has a question that they would like to know how does, the errors that you see in the system, how do they occur? Like, how does misreads or mishits, how do they happen?
So with the dual verification process, there were no misreads with the system. We were only alerted to any license plate letters or numbers that were in NCIC. That's it. If the combination of letter to numbers that were ran through the system and they notified us, there were no misreads. They notified us. We verified that, yes, this is based on the image you see of the vehicle, because we see the vehicle, we see the plate, we see the numbers and letters and what is associated with. Bit of an anecdote, we did have a partial plate that was red, not a misread, because it matched, I think it was like 117. It was a stolen license plate out of New York. It was a partial plate because there was a trailer that with the arm, the little wheelie leg was blocking the first half of the license plate. It's not a misread. It read the numbers correctly, compared it to NCIC, and notified us. That's why that is so vital and important to have that dual verification, that nobody knew about it. Y'all would have known about it had not occurred here. But it's not a misread. That's where the verification comes in, to ensure that only valid entries get looked for.
And then I would add as well, while the dual verification process is a very good practice to address misreads on the front end, once again, that auditing committee composed of those different groups, I think will be what we need to make sure we can address any misreads that happen on the back end as well. So both of those aspects working together, I think will create a pretty solid foundation to make sure that misreads aren't something we truly have to be worried about all of the time.
All right. This next question is for CRB. What questions are we not asking that we should be?
Okay. That's a great question. When I think about this process, it's been a long process, as Jamel mentioned. I think the policy information is important. Like anything else, having strong policy procedures in place for misreads and mishaps is important. I also think about the budget aspect here. I mean, we've talked about this is a program that's going to cost the city millions of dollars, $4 million. $4.1 million, I believe. And so when I think about that, I think about like the longevity of the program, right? How long is this going to last? How long is that equipment going to last? How much money are we going to be sinking into this? We saw earlier in the year, last year, where we had a taser issue, the same thing, where they needed to be updated. We were under a contract. And then we wanted new tasers. And so we know that technology is advancing very rapidly. And so we get these things in place. It's costing us $4.1 million. What's the next thing that's going to happen? How are they going to be updated, upgraded? That's important. That's the question. And then I think the other question is, I'm not really clear on the contract itself, the vendors, what their responsibility is, and those types of things. But as for, how they're going to work, I think the placement, as Dylan kind of laid out, the placement is important. I hope that we take the information that we learned during the pilot program and that we learned from it, so that the placement now won't be disproportionately, placed in just neighborhoods of Black and brown people, or just even when you use the term high crime areas, that's very concerning as well. So we just need to be more cognizant of what the outcomes could be with that and what it looks like. And so, those are some of my top questions. Do you have anything that you can think of?
Absolutely, yes. I think for me, there's a human component to this that the questions become, we talk about this technology in a very static perspective, but how does it inform or allow us to better understand how people have experienced systems across Nashville? The health component in terms of the social determinants of health, where people live, how they live, and things of that nature. Do we have pockets of areas that are identified in a very pejorative way that could be adversely impacted by, people who know that and things of that nature? I think we have to do a better job of, again, they're people. We're talking about people. We're talking about people's lives. We're talking about young people especially, and who are not necessarily in control of where they live and how they live. And we have to do a better job of taking care of the people in Nashville. So I think my questions go there. How is this data can be used more effectively to help us, identify and solve problems down the road.
And I just wanted to add, thank you for that. I did want to talk a little bit about the private LPR data. It is something that, like I said earlier, what we find now is that we have the law, the local legislation that covers a 10-day period of information. But a lot of communities now are putting up their own LPRs. And I'm not really sure, it's not been really clear to me on what happens when they call and say, hey, we want you to look at some of this private LPR data. And then what happens with it, where are the safeguards around it, how is it, destroyed, where is it kept, and that part isn't clear because it's not covered under the legislation. And so I do think that is a concern. That's a question that we should be asking, and we should have a really good answer for that. And we need to be able to figure out how to handle private LPR data because it is on the uprise. I've had several people contact me about their own LP or wanting to put LPRs up in their neighborhoods. So that's the question that I have and I'm concerned about.
All right. Before we move on, would MNPD, would you like to respond before we move to the next question? Okay. All right. We'll move right along. The next question, how would MNPD's implementation or use of LPR technology change, if at all, when considering the new state law that was passed requiring MNPD to cooperate with ICE? And then there's a follow-up.
It still doesn't change, the rules of the ordinance that we're bound to abide by. Everything still has to meet the rules that were set in place by the ordinance that the council wrote. The easy thing about it is it was well written, so it gave us left and right boundaries on what to do and what not to do. So, you can say work with them. That still doesn't mean that we circumvent any rules, and like Ms. Fitchard said, still doesn't circumvent policies and things that we already have in place to prevent misuse.
There's a follow-up. According to the person that wrote this question, there's a piece of the legislation that speaks to equitable distribution in the legislation. Can you offer a definition of how that is defined as far as equitable distribution per the legislation?
Of the cameras?
Yes. I'm kind of hesitant to read it because I want to make sure that the statements have been fact-checked that we share. So okay.
Yeah, so I think that is an important question on how we defined equitable. And yeah, I can let MNPD answer with their definition of equitable too. But at least for me, my definition would be that no matter who you are, what demographic you are, what part of town you live in, where you're coming or going, that you have an equal chance of driving through an LPR as someone of, throw a dart against the wall and hit, a demographic or population or location you're driving to or whatnot. So I think that goes back to our original point too of why placement is so important, because while the technology is neutral itself, if it's not equitably placed both across quadrants and in quadrants too, then it can get into the realm of targeted or pretextual stops. So I would really once again emphasize the importance of placement that doesn't just rely on any one statistic like crime statistics, but encompasses, an assortment of different metrics used to place the LPRs in a way that no matter who you are or where you're going, you have an equal chance of driving through them.
like to respond?
Dylan's absolutely right. The placement of the cameras is the most vital aspect of this. During the pilot phase, they used population density and high crime areas, high victim areas to place the cameras. Well, through these meetings that we've had that he's been a part of, and I've gone to this 12th, 13th meeting I've done with this, these conversations are what help us decide on where to place them. So that's why it's incredibly important. I greatly appreciate everyone being here, being a part of this conversation. So ideally, with this map right here, it is equally balanced between each quadrant. So that was the basic, very basic definition of equity. That meaning if there was 6 in this quadrant, 6 in this quadrant, each quadrant. We've expanded on that based on these conversations, and ideally we would look at, based on population density, community recommendations and locations, because those who live in this area know where people travel. They know the cut-throughs. But we are bound by the National Department of Transportation major and collector street plans. One thing we learned through this process is we know that everyone uses Briley Parkway. It is a major wraparound through the city. Even that part of Briley Parkway that connects from 40 down to Nolensville Road, that is not part of the major or collector streets. It is a state route that is not part of this. So we put it on adjacent plans or adjacent streets to help support those intersections where people travel. Not only do we look at violent crime, high victim areas, but one of the conversations that came up here in North Precinct was, where are the cars driving? So we got the TDOT data from, TDOT on the, don't laugh. We got the data from TDOT on the high trafficked areas, and we had the threshold of it was 30,000 vehicles on average per day. Anything on that on up would keep it out of any neighborhoods, would keep it out of any specific roadways and streets that is not high traffic, because we don't want to place a camera or one of these LPRs on an area where people aren't driving. That doesn't do any good. So those are the things we looked at. So those are the metrics and matrices that we looked at to develop this map and what our future plans are. So that is our hope. He's absolutely right. Placement matters.
All right. I'm going to move to the next question. Good. Okay. Can you speak to the effectiveness of LPRs in solving crimes that could not have been solved but for LPRs? Said another way, crimes that can only be solved with LPRs. How is that measured?
I think going back to the presentation that Lieutenant Huddleston did, we saw the number of weapons recovered and other things, and the vehicle theft is not the only crime being committed. So if they've stolen a car and gone and done robberies or broken into homes, that's significant. No criminal specializes like in, I only do home invasions, I don't do anything else. So they're going to be suspects in other crimes. So what the LPRs have done historically, back in the day, if you found a stolen car, it was just because you happened to get behind one that was stolen. Or you found a vehicle that was burned out, or some apartment complex called because this car had been sitting in the parking lot for a month. What the LPRs do is it lets us know that there's a stolen vehicle with occupants. So I think Mr. Gooch was who said, it's not a fix-all, it is a tool. So what this does is it gives the officers opportunities to come out and conduct interviews and give other victims closure where we might not have had a suspect, or we might not have recovered property or other things that would have allowed them, to prosecute or have some kind of, have their property returned or whatever it may be.
All right. And for our final question of the evening, the 10 people that have access to LPRs, who are they? Officers and or civilians? How are they selected? What makes them qualified to be selected? What is the demographic makeup of the 10 folks selected?
Two of the 10 people are IT personnel, and that was for the computer stuff. The rest of them are police officers that are assigned to us, and everyone that has access to it has to take the NCIC test, which we have to recertify, retest every year to remain qualified. That's what lets us have the ability to run license plates and driver's license, things like that. They certify officers when they come through the academy. It is quite a lengthy process. And then retesting every year, which I think just starts this year. Yes. As I can tell you, is a lengthy process, and it doesn't get any easier as we get older to pass the test.
All right. Respond? Yep.
Yeah, I just asked that question self of Dylan because I think that there has to be some checks and balances in place with who has access to these things. I mean, I think that we've had this conversation, but technology is technology. There's always going to be some issues, and so it really on the front end with the reading of the license plate reader, the checks and balances has to be really tight. Because there's always going to be the inherent, it's already built into a system. It's surveillance technology. So there's going to be mistakes. My concern is, what do we do when that happens? And are there safeguards around protecting the public and their civil rights when these accidents or these issues or this, maybe not accidents happen? And I don't think that we've talked enough about the precautions and what we do if these things occur. What will it look like? How do we remedy those? How do we work on the front end to prevent those? Is it more people in this process here, reviewing them? Those are questions that I don't think that we've answered clear enough, in my opinion.
All right. Would you like to respond?
We do our best to go back and spot check. We everything is logged and maintained. We go back and do these things, and I know either one of us are afraid to have the difficult conversations with those that work for us, and ultimately hold people accountable through whatever our disciplinary process looks like, whatever violations that looks like, and how the matrix is established for the disciplinary process for officers. That's kind of going back to what Mr. Johnson said before about the past is, I know when I go home at night and I lay my pillow on the head, I know I've treated people with respect and kindness. And, I don't ask the officers or those that work for me to conduct themselves in a manner that I'm not going to conduct myself. And sometimes that means when something goes sideways, you got to look people in the eye and have the hard conversations. I feel very fortunate to be here and to answer some of these hard questions, because my personal philosophy is, if I can't explain why we're doing something, why are we doing it? And, it takes people taking time out of their day to sit in here and ask questions, and us to sit here and talk about it and hear each other. We talked about that after the meeting the other night. So, it requires us doing our job when we find something.
All right. So at this time, we're going to offer final words from our guest, Jamil, and then we'll go. Whoever wants to popcorn it.
I would like to say thank you to those were great questions, and thank you to all the presenters. I think that has been amazing. And I do want to just mention that we're talking about an institution. And I believe you when you say you have those personal values, and I really appreciate you mentioning that, but I think that's too much to bear on one individual for an institution. And I think that's for all of us. So as we talk about these license plate readers, I think it's also interesting that our city is going through such an economic boom, and we are continuously talking about expanding surveillance in an environment where the building up is also displacing folks. So I do want to mention again that I think as we have these conversations around these technological advances, that we also should begin to guide them towards how do we make sure that people can afford to live in this city, which then creates a safer environment that I think that we're trying to really create as community members, as folks in this room. So I really appreciate this conversation. I look forward to continued conversation, especially over things that also make our community safe.
Thank you so much. Final words, who would like to go first? Or...
Okay. I'm just very appreciative to be here, to have this opportunity alongside the police department, the mayor's office and administration, and many of you that have showed up to these meetings over the last 3 days. It's important that we have these conversations. It's important that we are respectful of what the community's desires are. I think that not having them in conversations about policing is, to me, it's a travesty, but I think that we're doing a great job of putting that forward because we need to hear. I mean, people have a right to talk about how they want and what they think, what they, number one, think about policing and how they feel about it and how they want to be policed. This is our city. It's not just one person's city. It's not just one entity. And so this is a community collaborative, I think, engagement. And I'm just really happy that we can have this kind of conversation. And also, I think, moving forward, being a part of the bigger conversations. We heard all of this information today, and what we do with it is the next step. So thank you. Appreciate it.
MPD?
I won't ramble too long because I rolled some of mine into my last one, but it takes time and effort to be part of the process, and that's exactly what y'all have done by being here tonight. So, if you heard something that you didn't know or something you have a question about, by all means, shoot us an email on the feedback or tell your friends. We got to have conversations. We have to be open to hear other people's points of view. So I appreciate y'all all coming, and thank you. Oh, yes. The PowerPoint will be on Nashville.gov.
All right. Well, this brings an end to our series, but hopefully not into the discussion. If you're watching online, thank you. We've been at the Coleman Community Center, Southeast. This is our last stop. Again, we would like to thank those who have watched virtually and attended these meetings. On behalf of the mayor's office, please continue to ask questions. Next steps, we're going to compile the information that we received and work toward a pathway to where we can hopefully create a policy that's fair. And you'll hear more about that, of course. Also wanted to give a thank you to Councilmember Horton, who's with us today, part of our Metro Council. And again, to CRB and MMPD for the fine presentations that you have done this past week. All right. With that being said, thank you. Have a safe drive home.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.